It's The Real News. I'm Aaron Matek. This is part 2 of my interview with Rania Khalek. In part 1, we discussed her reporting on the Yazidis in Iraq after suffering mass atrocities at the hands of ISIS. The Yazidis now face repression under the Kurds. In part 2, we discussed the Yazidis in the broader Middle East context. Rania Khalek is an independent journalist and host of the podcast Unauthorized Disclosure. I'm just struck by how every time we talk about somebody suffering in that region, it's just impossible to divorce it from its wider context, its history. I mean, we can criticize the Kurds for carrying out repression now, but then of course we have to keep in mind that they faced their own past of repression too. Under Saddam, and the repression that they suffered under Saddam was supported, of course, by the U.S. So you have now just this constant cycle where people who are coming from their own past experiences of trauma and repression now committing it against others, against groups under their rule, like with the Yazidis under the Kurds.
No, exactly. And it's, at the end of the day, it kind of goes to the outside players who continue to meddle in the region. They just create a more violent, more toxic region where the conditions are fomented for more sectarianism, for more hatred, for more atrocities, one group against another. And, you know, yeah, I didn't really get to this in my piece, but now you have a situation because of what happened with ISIS. And we can also say ISIS, the outcome of ISIS existing is a direct result of the U.S. intervention in Iraq. You could say that Al-Qaeda would have never come to Iraq. You never would have had ISIS had the U.S. not opened the floodgates when it intervened in that country in the way it intervened. And so now, you know, you have a situation now where Yazidis and Sunni Arabs who were able to live together for quite a while in Sinjar, next door, being not just neighbors, but also friends, now hate each other. Yazidis never, ever, ever, and this is actually not just true for Yazidis. I mean, I'm talking like minority communities in general in Iraq. Never, I mean, they now kind of harbor this hatred for Sunni Arabs because of what ISIS did to them. And in some cases, it was their neighbors who turned on them when ISIS came. So people that they knew, people they were even friends with. And so now there is this trauma and this distrust between you know, Sunni Arabs and Yazidis, and they probably won't be able to live together for a very, very long time. At the same time, the Kurdistan regional government is using the ISIS atrocities as a way to kind of like remove Sunni Arabs from areas, just kind of calling them all ISIS and removing them and burning down their villages that they did in Sinjar. And so now you have a situation where it just, you know, like you said, one community after another keeps being pitted against the other. And at the end of the day, the region is less safe. The region is a less hospitable place for people to live. And I mean, Iraq is honestly one of the most extreme versions of this that I've ever seen. And it's the outcome of decades and decades and decades of, you know, U.S. empire meddling in that region and just using one group against another. And it's worse than any place I've ever seen in that respect. Syria, Lebanon, I mean, Iraq really tops it all. And so at the end of the day, I think it's really it's really kind of a lesson in why the U.S. should not be involved in the Middle East in the way it has been.
Rania, finally, you spoke to Yazidis who survived and witnessed, you know, unimaginable atrocities under ISIS. What was that like for you?
But you know, it's the first time I've ever had to sit down and listen to somebody tell me about how they were gang raped, or about how they were raped at all. I'm not a grief counselor, and I don't think that ever, I mean, I've never heard these kinds of stories before. It was really, really shocking to me, especially speaking to the women survivors the most. It was really, really shocking to me, the kinds of stuff they went through. In one case, you know, one woman told me that the ISIS wife of one of the men who bought her, she was sold 7 times, and one of the men who bought her, his wife actually helped him rape her. So you have women who participated in helping to rape people because of their identity, because they were subhuman to them, because they were Yazidi. Hearing these kinds of stories, honestly, it really felt like I was talking to like Holocaust survivors. It was really, really shocking. And I don't think that level of, I mean, like I said, the Yazidi plight has received a lot of attention, but I don't think their genocide has necessarily received the attention that it deserves, because all I kept thinking was how angry it made me, because there's an ideological basis, an ideological foundation for why ISIS did the things that they did. It doesn't happen in a vacuum. It doesn't come from nowhere. Its ideology is based in Salafism and Wahhabism, and this is an ideology that is the state religion of the U.S.'s greatest ally in the region, Saudi Arabia. And that's something that Yazidis kept saying to me that I never, ever, ever see expressed in any articles I read about the Yazidis, is they always say, how come Saudi Arabia is allowed to push these ideas everywhere? That's where this comes from. This is who did this to us, is this ideology. And they mention the Saudis, they mention the U.S. And for some reason, this will be in other articles I have coming out about this issue, but I never ever read about this. And so if anything, hearing the kinds of stories I heard, at the end of the day, as atrocious as they were and as traumatic as they were to hear, what made me angriest is that nobody's talking about the ideological basis behind this, which is a fascistic ideology that is tolerated because it comes from America's #1 ally in the region.
For raising this issue, in the same way that we've seen supporters of Israel call critics of Israel anti-Semites, I've recently been seeing some critics of yours paint your argument as Islamophobic for pointing to the particularly dangerous facets of Wahhabism in the Saudi Arabian version, which I found a very interesting parallel. I don't know, brief comment on that.
Well, yeah, so I think that's a really great way you just put it, if anything, the people who want to defend Wahhabism have adopted the similar strategy as we've seen Israel's most excited supporters use against its critics, which is to call anybody who criticizes Zionism or Israel or the policies of Israel an anti-Semite. And it's really sad to me to see people taking that strategy and applying it to the issue of Islamophobia, especially at a time when in America, Islamophobia is at its peak. It's at its worst it's ever been. We have a president right now who literally got elected on hatred for Muslims. And so it's not something that should ever be, I feel like it makes a mockery of Islamophobia to try and say that an austere strain of Sunni Islam like Wahhabism, to say that criticizing that is somehow Islamophobic. It's absolutely absurd. And beyond that, I will tell you right now, it is not just, this is the fascistic ideology in the Middle East, is Wahhabism and Salafi, like jihadi style thinking, which comes directly out of Wahhabism. And so for someone like me, who's a Middle Easterner, who is, who at the moment is based in the region, I can tell you right now, this is a conversation here that people are having. They don't see it as something Islamophobic whatsoever. And it's really absurd for people in the West to be projecting Western dynamics of Islamophobia onto a region that actually does have to deal with groups that want to impose Sharia law, that want to impose Al-Qaeda style laws, because we do have Al-Qaeda in this region that does want to impose this on people, that wants to wipe out minorities, and that wants to wipe out secular people, that wants to wipe out anybody who doesn't agree with them. And so I think it's just really, there's a lot of conversations happening among progressives in the U.S. about how it might be Islamophobic to be criticizing, like I said, Wahhabism and Salafism. But from my vantage point in this region, it just looks so absurd and so disconnected from reality.
The term that I think Max Blumenthal coined, correct me if I'm wrong, is woke Wahhabism.
Yeah, woke Wahhabism. I don't think people understand. It's so insane. Wahhabism literally preaches supremacy. It's like our version. It's the Middle East's version of white supremacy is Wahhabism. It's like these Al-Qaeda groups, these ISIS groups are the Middle East's version of the KKK and of these white nationalist groups you see in the U.S. And so if anything, these are kind of similar symptoms of something I see happening around the globe, which is this sort of rise of fascism. But we always have to remember that in the Middle East, in the context of the Middle East, and even beyond the Middle East, Wahhabism isn't rising naturally. Salafism isn't rising naturally. Saudi Arabia has spent $100 billion plus over the past several decades with the U.S.'s approval and participation, spreading this ideology in Muslim communities around the world. And this is something we need to be talking about, or else we end up conceding the conversation about these issues to the far right, which is just going to blanket brush every single Muslim as being a part of, the Wahhabi style doctrine, which isn't true. And so I think that this is a conversation that the left needs to be having. It needs to be on the forefront of. Because at the end of the day, Wahhabism is really just a tool of American imperialism. Because the Saudis don't do anything without America's approval and without America participating and helping them do it. So I think that's something to consider when we do have these conversations. Woke Wahhabism.
Rania Khalek, independent journalist, co-host of the podcast Unauthorized Disclosure. Her new piece for Alternet's Gray Zone project is called In the Field with Yazidi Fighters, Tales of Genocide at ISIS's Hands and More Conflict to Come. Rania, thank you.
Thanks, Aaron, for having me on.
And thank you for joining us on The Real News.